Welcome to AWAI's Great Books Club with your host, Marcella, Allison.
This is Marcella Allison, and I want to welcome you all to AWAI's Great Books Club. Call for April 2015. We are doing Win Your Case by Gerry Spence, which was a recommendation that was actually made at the Titans event by the great Gerry Bensavenga. And of course, when Gerry Bensavenga tells you there's a book that he's found one of the most valuable in his career that you should read, Mike and I had the same thought simultaneously, which is, let's read this book. So I am very pleased to introduce my special guest, Mike Palmer. Many of you know Mike from his role at Stansberry Research. Mike has been a past winner of AWAI's Copywriter of the Year, but I think far more probably important than that is the amazing success that you've had, Mike, at Stansberry Research, which is something all of us envy and watch closely. And I know part of your success has been not only your own success as a writer, but your ability to coach and mentor new writers. It's something that I think is one of probably your best talents and something that the folks who long to work with Stansberry, that's something that's important to them, is knowing that you're there and that the team is there and what they'll learn from them. So when we kick off this call, I wanted to ask you just briefly, Mike, before I introduce the rest of your team, why you have a book club. I know we have a book club, and I know why I love to do it, but why you have a book club there at Stansberry and why you believe it's important for your writers to read these books.
Thanks for the intro, Marcella. Let's see, why do we have a book club? I think that if you have any interest in writing copy for a living, one of the things we always look for when we're interviewing and one of the things we push very hard when we're training people is that you have to be a voracious reader. And so, I think it's something that we look for when we're hiring, and we're all people who love books and love ideas, and of course, we read a lot of stuff when we're actually writing copy, and we know that there's tons of great stuff that's been done in the past, all the classic books, and we also like to focus on things that aren't necessarily how-to guides for copy or even for marketing. There's so many good ideas. There's so many good ideas in so many books. So yeah, it's it's kind of, to me, it's kind of like attending seminars too and copy events where you even if you feel like most of the stuff that's being presented, and even if you've heard it before, when you read about it or attend a conference, inevitably it seems that it sparks something, it reminds you of something, and you typically walk away with all kinds of ideas. So I think it gets you out of your day-to-day grind and lets you focus on thinking about the work. So, we've been doing it. We do it on and off, and we've been doing it for a long time.
I think, you made a really good point, which is if all you read is copywriting books, you're not reading widely enough, because there's lessons to be learned from a book like this, which is by a trial lawyer, right, who has to persuade more than a trial lawyer, than an attorney trying to convince this jury to rule in honor of his defendant. And I learned so much just about storytelling and really about getting into the emotional shoes of your prospect from this book, especially the part about getting in the emotional shoes of your prospect and techniques and ways to do that and how to ask questions and brainstorm. I swear to God, I learned more about that from this book than any copywriting book I've read. And if all you focus on is a specific, not that the copywriting books aren't great, but if all you focus in on those books, I think you're going to miss a lot. And I can definitely see why Gerry Bensavenga recommended this book as one of the ones that he really finds value in. I wanted to ask you if you would just quickly read off the names of your team members who have joined us today. I'm very excited to see a little peek, a little window into how you do the magic there and how you guys interact and work with each other as a team. So Mike, I wonder if you'd just take a quick second and
Yep.
Introduce us to your members who are on the call with us.
Yeah, I mean, part of, you know, I think people invite me to events, and you know, some people in the business know my name, but you know, the fantastic thing about our business is that you know, there's literally no way I could even write my own copy without having the group that we have, and it's part of it is, you know, we have some of the best, literally some of the best copywriters in the world, and most people don't know who these folks are, but man, they're you know, there are a lot of famous names out there, and I would never trade any of these people for some of the famous names. So anyway, I'll just go through a few. I'll go through everybody who's on the call. This is not our entire group, but I'll introduce you to a few of these people. So just looking at the list I have here, Greg Ganoli has been writing copy for about a decade, I think. Greg. And he started with Stansberry, and he's written a lot of great front-end packages. He's written a lot of great back-end packages. Justin Gershwin's on the line. Justin has probably written more successful back-end promotions. Not probably, I know he's written more successful back-end promotions than anybody probably in the world in the past decade. But few people know who Justin is. Justin's a fantastic copywriter. Matt Risby is on the line. Matt's new to copywriting. He's been with us for about 18 months. Patrick Beauvais is on the line. Patrick's another one of our senior writers. We have just two distinctions in our group. You're either a senior writer or you're a junior writer. And Patrick is another one of our senior writers, a great copywriter. Stephen Melise is one of the best front-end copywriters in the business, and he's a senior writer as well. And I'm not sure if anybody else is on the line or not. I think Kelly maybe on the line, Kelly Brown. Anyway, so they're the only people who are showing up on my screen. So I don't know.
Well, I want to welcome all of you to this call, and I really appreciate you guys sharing a little bit of your process with us. I'll tell the folks who are listening that behind the scenes, Mike's entire team read the book along with me. They made notes. They sent me their comments. They are following the same process that they would follow in-house, which is sort of bringing up the key points and discussing it with each other as a team, and then with an eye towards how can we use this to improve our copy, which is, of course, not to be mercenary, but, you know, we're reading these books for a reason, because we want to become better copywriters. We want to have more successes. We want to have bigger royalties. And then Clayton would go on, right? We want a big car. We want a big house. We want a cute wife. I don't know, the whole list, right? So I'm really appreciative that we're going to get to sort of see a little bit about how that discussion happens between you all. I want to take just a second to introduce our book again. For those of you playing along at home, we are reading Win Your Case by Gerry Spence. Gerry is one of the greatest trial lawyers of all time. He has never lost a criminal case as a prosecutor or a defense attorney, and he has not lost a civil case since 1969. That is a incredible winning run, right? I guess the equivalent in our industry would be to say you've never lost the control, right, since 1969. That's pretty amazing, and very few copywriters could claim a win rate like that. And again, I wanted to just tell you that we're reading this book because the great Gerry Bensavenga, who's an amazing copywriter that I admire very much, has suggested that we read this book because he said he really learned a lot about storytelling and proof and winning the case with the consumer from how Gerry Spence writes about winning the case with the trial, in a trial with the jury. He really takes you all the way through how he prepares, how he presents his evidence, and how he wins over the decision maker. And as we know, winning over a consumer is very similar to how you have to win over a jury. And sometimes our consumers are even more suspicious, right, and doubting than the most doubting of jury members. And so our challenge is certainly as deep and as wide as his is. Mike and his team have prepared 7. Like I said, they went through the book. We highlighted quotes, and they came up with 7. Actually, they came up with, I think, about like 30, and I told you we could only talk about 7. 7 key copywriting lessons that we can all learn from the courtroom. So, Mike, the first lesson you sent me is you told me I should always be worried and freaked out about my copy, which is a little counterintuitive. I'm worried and freaked out about enough stuff in my life. Tell me why it is I need to be worried and freaked out about my copy and why that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Well, the lesson I got from this, I thought it was an interesting book. I liked it a lot, and like you said, I love Gerry Bencivengo's work, and it was, for me, it was a real revelation when I went to his retirement seminar, and I had a lot of beliefs about copy going in, and I'd never heard anyone talk about copy the way Gerry did. It was always people talking about techniques and different ways to get people's attention and the importance of headlines and all the things that everybody focuses on. But Gerry's approach was so different, and it just resonated with me so clearly. His whole focus was on proof and credibility, and it was such an eye opener for me because it was what I wanted copy to be and what I wanted to believe, but I wasn't sure if it was true. And so anyway, so when Gerry recommended this book, I jumped at the chance to read it. And, there's a lot of stuff that's in this book, and so much of it does focus on storytelling. And I don't really want to focus on that today because I think there's a lot of great stuff written about stories, and we all know that stories are what people are how you convince people, and stories are how you make points. And my friend James Altucher has a good saying that I think is great to keep in mind when you're writing copy and when you're giving a speech, and it's ABS, always be storytelling. So that's James's piece of advice, and I think it's great. So anyway, but I don't want to focus on stories for this because I just think we can go on and on about that forever, and we've talked about that a lot before. So I thought there were, as you said, there were a bunch of key points, and the first point I wanted that was just interesting to me that I wanted to talk about briefly was this idea of being worried about your copy. And this is, I know that we'll have lots of folks from lots of different levels of success and experience as far as their copy career. Some people just starting out, and maybe some people who are quite experienced. And this is something that I wish someone had told me at the very beginning. And this idea is not that you should be worried about your copy, but that you always will be worried about your copy. And it will never go away no matter how many hits and how many successes you've had. You're only as good as your next package. And that's the nature of this business. And but I think that when you realize that even people who have been doing it for 10 or 15 years and have had a bunch of successes, they're thinking the same thing. They're worried about it as much as you are as someone who's just starting out and maybe working on your second or third or even first package. And for me, that was kind of it wasn't revealed to me the first time here, but I remember when I first started speaking when I was starting out, and I learned that experienced copywriters were as anxious about their next package, as the beginning people.
Right.
It helped me deal with that emotion a lot, and to be able to just kind of focus on the work, and to know that that's the nature of the business. That's the way it is.
Well, and I also like how he talks about you can use that fear as fuel. You can actually take that fear and face it and turn it around and use it to help fuel your performance, and you don't have to let it paralyze you. Denise, you may remember there was a very famous actor who had appeared on Broadway for many decades, and he has a quote where he said he still, before every performance, would throw up backstage before he went out in front of the audience, even though he had won many accolades and had been performing for decades. And I think this is really true. The sign of fear doesn't mean you're not a good writer. The sign of fear means that you're in the right place. You should be afraid. You're about to take on a challenging task.
For me, it means.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. For me, it means that you care enough, and it means that you want to do a great job. I would worry if I wasn't wasn't concerned about it, and I wasn't concerned I wasn't going to do it, it would be that's when I know I guess it's time to stop writing copy. So, any comments from that, Patrick or anyone else? If you guys want to have any thoughts on that before we move on to the next, we got a bunch of things to get through in a short amount of time, so I won't spend too much time.
And Patrick, I wanted to ask you too, because you had picked this quote, not only why you picked it, but just briefly, how do you personally deal with the fear? How do you get past that fear to actually writing, as opposed to many of us have the experience of being completely paralyzed by the fear, like, oh my God, so terrified of the outcome that you never even start the project, which is not good.
That's true. What I've learned is that the danger of ignoring fear, and is that sometimes, particularly a newer writer, might tunnel into themselves and be able to become overprotective of an idea and decide that they're going to shine it up on their own and maybe pitch it to the group when it's ready. And in my experience, it's always best to just face the fear early and face the group with their idea sooner, because it will not only accelerate the project, but it'll save you, I don't know, weeks of time every year of wasted time spent on projects that maybe never were going to pan out to begin with.
So I want to, because you were breaking up just a little bit, I want to repeat what you say, because Patrick, I think that is absolutely brilliant and something really important for our listeners to get. What Patrick is saying is, look, sometimes you get this idea, but you're so afraid of everyone shooting it down, saying you're a moron, whatever the equivalent is, right, that you don't actually bring it to the group. You're like, oh, but it's not good enough yet. I'm going to just perfect it here, and then I'll bring it when I think it won't embarrass me and I think everyone will love it. When really, if you just put it out there like, hey, guys, I had this idea, the first thing that happens is people start testing you, right? They, push back against you. So now you kind of see how to broaden it, how to deepen it, how to tweak it. Or the other thing is you find out really quick early on that it's not a strong enough idea, and you didn't just waste 6 months polishing and perfecting it, or even 6 days. And I've learned that with my mentors. I used to be terrified to bring things to David in Paris, and then I realized that just exactly like you said, if I start throwing something at the wall with them, what comes out of that call is usually a far stronger idea than the one that I would have if I had just carried it on my own. So Patrick, I think that's a really good point, and that's a way to overcome the fear, is just throw it out there, and there's no shame, no blame. Just get ideas going.
That's right. And I agree with the sentiment that fear is a great fuel as well, because I think it focuses the mind. To me, that sort of comes into play when you're on a super tight deadline. I know that, whenever I've felt that fear in my stomach and working on a project and in the back of your mind and thinking, man, how am I going to get this done? It forces you to keep the pen moving and find a way to get it done in a way that if you had more time, if there wasn't that fear present, you might kind of dither and not quite arrive at the solution, right. Or at least not quickly.
Believe me, I'm the queen of waiting until the terror of the fact that it's due in 2 days forces me to overcome the fear. And I will admit that sometimes my best writing, my hot copy, was the copy that I was forced under the gun to write, because finally I was out of dithering time and I had to do something, and I just let myself go without the critic, and that's been amazing. Mike's right. We've got a lot of stuff to go through, so I want to move on to our next one, which is when you sent me this as a slide, Mike, I was like, wow, this is interesting. So what is the good test to see if you're right for this business? I found this very curious.
Yeah, what I meant by this was I think that I can't remember who I read said this, but it's always kind of resonated with me. And the idea is that, you'll know that the business is right for you if it's something that you think about when you're not working. So if it's something you think about when you're going for a walk, or when you're exercising, or when you're in the shower. And so to me, that's always been not only do you know then that the career might be right for you, that this type of work might be right for you, but it's also where so many, it's where so many of your actual ideas come from. And, Gerry Bensavenga is such a huge believer in the subconscious and trying to plant things in your head and just being surprised at what emerges when you least expect it. And, I think that's very true. And I think, you have to be able to, when you work on projects, to do a lot of work and then to be able to put it aside for a certain amount of time. And it usually is when you're doing something totally unrelated that some of the best ideas pop into your head. So that was just a small point, but I thought it was interesting.
Mike, I wanted
Greg?
to ask you. Whoops, sorry, I was going to say, Mike, I just wanted to ask you real quick. I noticed that many of the examples he gives in this quote, in this one, it's walking, and then he talks about taking a shower at one point. And so for me, I think this is true also, that sometimes it's those sort of ritual movements that get my brain thinking. Walking for me is one of the most powerful ways. When I'm working on a project and then I go out in the afternoon for my hour walk and I carry that notebook with me that he talks about, there's something about the rhythm of that activity. I've heard a lot of poets talk about this too, about walking, that spurs those ideas. And I wanted to ask, is there some sort of activity for you that lets you turn off your brain, the left brain part, and let that sort of magic moment come through? Is there, do you golf, do you run, have you noticed anything?
Yeah, I do lots of those things. I walk all the time. I probably walk every day, and I do think it's a great place to think about things. I do think also it's important when you're doing something like copy where it takes so much mental energy, that I do think it's very important to have some activities in your day where there's no way you can think about copy or your work, so whether that's, whatever, swimming,
because otherwise you burn
lifting
out,
weights or whatever, I think you need that type of thing that it makes it pretty much impossible for you to think about work, because you have to focus on whatever the task at hand is.
I think that's great. I do want to bring in storytelling just briefly here, only because there's a couple things he does in here that I hadn't really thought about that I think are really interesting. And one is, I love where he says those powerful words are, tell me a story. And I love that Greg picked out those 4 words, tell me a story. And the other thing I like in terms of preparation is he ties this idea of telling the story to everybody you're around as your way of practicing. So Mike, you said this is a good business to you if you find yourself thinking about it, doing it, that you would do it even if you weren't paid for it, that you love it. And I think the same can be true of storytellers, that some of the best copywriters are natural storytellers. And so one of the rules I think that I look for to see if you are in the right business is to say, do you find yourself telling stories at the dinner table? When someone says to you, what do you do for a living? Do you answer with a story? So Greg, I'm interested to hear your take on this, because you talked about tell me a story. You talked about the power of stories. Mike said we've heard this all the time. But what struck you as different or new or sort of enlightening, Greg, about storytelling in this book that you maybe came at it from a different direction than you have in the past?
Well, I think you're exactly right. Sorry, I wasn't sure if my phone was on. I think that you're exactly right with the storytelling. And just to get, before we get off that point, I just wanted to mention something about the taking walks too. And this is something that's always stuck with me, and I find it really enlightening when I'm stuck on writing copy or I'm just a little burnt out for the day or whatever the case may be. This very prolific writer, his name is Lawrence Block. You may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Telling Lies for Fun and Profit, and one of the things that he mentioned as a technique in that book was that when he would take walks, he would always take walks. He would never walk the same path twice. And he said that really kind of carved out new pathways in his mind. He never got stuck in a rut that way. And so I've always taken that to heart. And when I go on many walks just like Mike, just like I'm sure lots of people do, to try to energize the mind. And that's one of those tricks I've found, that if I do find myself, walking that same way, like I live in the city, so it's very easy to just kind of walk the most direct way somewhere or take a familiar route. But if you're able to just take a different turn every now and then and see some scenery that you don't normally see, it really does something to the mind that even just plain old walking by itself doesn't do. So.
Greg, I think you're absolutely right, because I think just like when you drive the same route to work, we've all had the experience of ending up at work and having no idea how we drove there, right, like a zombie was driving the car, because we just go unconscious. I do think the same thing that happens if you're running on the same track in the same direction for the same length of time. You just zone out. But if you're taking a different route, you're going to notice a different house, you're going to see a different tree in bloom, things are going to it's going to wake you up. I mean, because really that's what we're talking about. You know, we're talking about waking up to what's going on around us so that you're more present and you don't miss things. I mean, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I want to repeat aloud to make sure our listeners catch this. It's Lawrence Block, and it's called Lawrence. Telling Lies for Fun and Profit.
That's right. I would definitely recommend that book to anyone, copywriters or not, anyone who's interested in ideas or interested in writing in whatever form. I find that book, I found it very enlightening. I constantly refer back to it. I mean, he wrote fiction. He wrote, pulp novels, detective stories, stuff like that. But he wrote hundreds of them, throughout his career, and was very successful, perhaps not exactly famous, but very successful and very good writer. So I'd recommend a lot of his books as well.
Wonderful. I just added that to our list, which is growing as we speak, of books to read. So I know you had one more comment you wanted to make about storytelling before we moved on, or about, tell me a story and why that's so powerful.
Right. I'll be quick. I know that we have to move quickly. But I think you're exactly right. I think as we all know, there's a power in telling a story, and I think that when you're trying to write copy, we tend to maybe get stuck on the minutia of certain things, where we're trying to prove a particular point, or we're trying to construct a paragraph in exactly the right way, or whatever the case may be. If you just whatever reason you have your writer's block, whatever you're stuck on, and I think it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is you're really just trying to construct an argument. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to weave a path from the headline to the close. And what really stuck out with me with this quote was when he would talk about, he said, I'm always thinking about the verbs, always the verbs. And what popped in my mind instantly when he said that was, what I'm always thinking about are the transitions, always the transitions. And I'm always thinking about, how do you get from one part of the story to the next in a seamless, logical way. And I think that's one of the keys to writing a successful package, is being able to connect those dots. And I think the transitions are very important. And so when I'm taking those walks, or when I'm sitting in the library, or whatever the case may be, and things are percolating subconsciously, usually what I'm stuck on is a way to make those transitions, and those are the things that usually I'm able to kind of come up with when I'm just not really thinking about it. And those are the hardest parts, I think, for me personally, is kind of making that flow from one end to the next.
I think that's so true. That's really interesting, because I have the same experience when walking, that if I'm working on a piece of copy, I'll have sort of full arguments or full sections that I'm really clear on, almost like these whole blocks of the argument, but I'm not really sure how they connect to each other. And you're right, as I'm walking, I'll be like, oh, there's the connection that seamlessly takes them from sort of this first mini argument into my second mini argument, or finishes up one objection and opens up the next one that I'm going to talk about. And I think the other thing I just want to end here by pointing out what Mike said, which is one of the reasons that Gerry Bensavenga loved this quote is because we're really talking about the power of the unconscious mind, and this idea of how to direct that. And I love it. He says, often thoughts come to me just as I am dropping off to sleep, the hypnagogic state, as psychologists like to call it, or more often a clarity, comes bursting through like the rising sun just at the point of awakening. And so we'll leave this section with one last tip, which is always have a small notebook with you. Those little moleskins cost like nothing, right? And you can tuck them in your pocket, in your purse, in your backpack, wherever, so that when you do have the moment when the transition comes to you or the headline or the lead, you got something to write it down on, because all the studies show you think you'll remember it when you get home, and you won't.
Sorry, I want to make, this is Mike again. Can I make one more point about this, and we'll move on?
Absolutely.
I think Greg's point was great about transitions, and I think that, to me, it's one of the things that you see new copywriters really, really have a hard time with, and it's one of the things that really differentiates very good copywriters. And I think that, especially if you're new, I think that, you know, people, when they have swipe files and clip files, they always want to swipe headline ideas and bullets and that kind of thing. But I think most people will be much better off if you would start swiping, swipe the way people make transitions, swipe the way they transition from into the close of the copy, swipe the way they, you know, go from one section to another, because that is, it's much more nuanced, and, you know, swiping headlines is pretty obvious, but it would be a great thing if people, especially starting out, if someone told me to do that, it would have really helped.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, a million people can try to imitate, oh, they laughed when I sat down at the piano. But when you actually have to get from one large block of copy to the next section, and it's a whole different idea, and it's still just as important to your case, but it's like you're now changing lanes on the highway, how do you do that? And I agree. I think there's words that help you with transitions. There's linkages that help you with transitions. And this is what's going to prevent your reader from coming to a dead stop, right? Because if you take their hand and you help them over the threshold from the living room to the dining room, they're not going to run into a closed door, you know, and you're really opening the door from one room to the next, and then you're guiding them through it. And that is so critical, because at any one of those transition points, that's where you're going to lose your reader. Once they get past the headline, it's the transitions, I think, that are the most delicate. It's like the train in the switch yard, right? He's approaching, and he's got the switch man has got to put that train on the right track, or all hell's going to break loose. I think that's absolutely critical. So, guys, you have another homework assignment from this call, which is to go back to your swipe file, maybe the one that you've been saving for headlines, to look at your financial controls, especially ones from Gerry, and go through and highlight or circle the transition. So that's another homework assignment from this call that I'm giving everybody. So now let's talk about proof, because, Mike, I know when we first talked about doing this book, this is one of the things you said to me is I think that the way that Spence handles proof and the way that Gerry Bensavenga handles proof, that you really learn to see and to think about proof in a whole new way. So, Mike, tell us about what you learned about proof from this book, and what are these extra steps that that really take your proof elements to the next level instead of just rattling off a set of 56 facts?
Yeah, I think for me there are 2 points that I'd like to make that I think are important here. So one is, and this started with Gerry Bensavenga when I saw him speak for the first time, and, you know, Gerry talked about how, you know, when you're looking for copy ideas, what you're essentially looking for many times are just unique proof elements. You're looking for unique ways to prove something. And, you know, it's not the way most copywriters look for ideas at all, but it really is what, you know, you can base entire promotions and packages around unique ways of proving things, especially when you're writing to a group of, you know, subscribers, what we would typically call a back-end, you know, product. If you're writing to people who already know you, you can base an entire promotion just around finding a unique proof element. And what we mean by that is something out of the ordinary. So the way that most people prove things in all copy, you know, in 99% of the packages you see today, there are a handful of things that people use, right? They use testimonials, they use quotes from outside sources, And that's pretty much it. Maybe there's a study in there.
Right.
But that's pretty much it. And so, you just have to remember, I think, that your reader is so skeptical, and your reader does not want to believe you. And so you have to go above and beyond proving things. And going above and beyond does not mean throwing in more testimonials and throwing in more quotes from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
Right,
because
if they already think your testimonials are fake, right, or they're already suspicious, like, oh, they probably paid these guys, right, because their readers are so suspicious these days. So if they are suspicious of the type of proof you're using, and then you go ahead and add 16 more of them, I'm actually likely to get more suspicious, not less suspicious, right?
I mean, for me, it's like every product, there's always at least a few people who like even the world's crappiest thing. So, everyone has, I see newsletters out there that I know are horrible, and they have glowing testimonials, and I don't think they're made up. I'm sure somebody at some point likes it, and they wrote a testimonial.
Right, it's the pig and the truffle argument.
It just doesn't really, to me, testimonials mean, and I think even when you're looking for testimonials, you want testimonials that say something different. And so you're always, this is the whole thing about proof, is you want to find, some way of proving your point that hasn't been done, and that will jar the reader and make your copy really stand out. So, that can be all kinds of things that can. What's that?
Well, I was going to say, in your package about gold, would you consider the whole story of the Rothschilds as a way of proving something differently? You're using this whole history, this story of this family, and that's not a testimonial, and it's not, make 10% in 10 days. Would that kind of fit what you're talking about? I just want to give our listeners a
I mean, that does a little bit, and I think that with that package, what we were able to eventually do was to go even further. I mean, we took a trip to Switzerland. We went to Zurich, and, we went into the vaults of these old Swiss banks. And so, that, of course, became part of the package. And, of course, that's not possible with every package that you do. But you can always take extra steps. And I just think that, most copywriters out there are lazy and they won't do it. And you can really differentiate yourself. And it doesn't have to be you don't have to spend any money. Simply picking up the phone. I can remember one of my favorite examples of this idea. I think it was a package by Jay Livingston, and I think he was working at the Oxford Club at the time. And in this package, he was telling the story of someone famous and wealthy who had invested in this company, and he called them on the phone to try to get them to talk about it. And I don't know what happened when the person or the group answered the phone, but they basically wouldn't talk to him. They wouldn't give any comment. So, he basically was able to use something like that. Like, I called them on the phone and they wouldn't speak about this investment, like it was,
right.
So you're able to turn all that. That's just like one of those things where, like, when I see a writer doing that, I know that it's different and it stands out and it makes everything more believable. So I just think that, in the book, Gerry Spence did a great job of, he was always looking for what's the most extreme thing we could do to prove this point. So he talked about, can we build a model of the holding cell, and how big is it? Can we reconstruct it in the courtroom? And he talked about how he was shocked when he met a lawyer who hadn't even been to the scene of the crime or to the scene of the accident or hadn't tried out the product or whatever. And so I think that it's a really great way to, proof is hard. You can't just use testimonials. You can't just use track records. You can't just use things that you can look up online, because everybody can do that. So it doesn't carry any weight with your reader at all. And
you don't get an advantage from that.
It doesn't help you. It doesn't make the reader believe you. So if you can take extra steps, if you can actually get people on the phone and ask for quotes and put that in the copy, we called them and asked them, or we visited them in person, or we went to the library, whatever you can do to make your proof more than just what can be done from sitting behind the desk at a computer looking online. So to me it's a great point, and I wish everybody would do that.
I was remembering, I was thinking about, I have Clayton Makepeace on the mind because we have our his financial copywriting seminar coming up next month. I know you guys are going to be there as well. And the last time he showed this video, and I will not even remember which wife's product it was for, but basically they're in China, they're in front of this building, and they're shooting the video live, and he's saying, you know, we could be in great danger just telling you this, you know, there's all this drama, and completely unscripted. These cops, you know, these security officers, Chinese security officers, start coming towards them like, what are you doing? What are you filming? You know, it was more vivid than anything they could say, right? You see this in the background, you see them in front of the building, you're really there live. Like, I totally believe it then. And that's a whole different element than just saying, you know, when I say this, I'll be in trouble. Like, it's a whole different way of doing that presents it in a real and a visceral way.
Yeah, I remember that example. I remember seeing that copy, and when I first started watching, I was like, wow, they really are. Like, this is neat. They're really there. Like, that
yeah,
immediately,
right.
that perks, you know, someone like me who sees tons of copy like that, just that
Yep.
bit that they were actually there recording it made me watch it, whereas if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't have watched it all.
Same here. I was totally sucked in. And then I had to curse Clayton because, you know, the next 45 minutes were shot. Stephen, I want to give you a chance to put your 2 cents in here. I know this was, this idea of the proof was really something that stayed with you and struck you, and so I wondered if you could share with us what you got from this different approach to proof and this idea of making it more visceral almost. Stephen, you might have to unmute yourself. Just click on your little X and unmute yourself. Or Cam, can you unmute Stephen so he can talk with us?
Oh,
I think he's duct taped his mouth. Now we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me there?
Now we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying there's a really we did just another example of the kind of unique way to prove something. A few years ago, we did some copy about, you know, the companies that are going to supply the pieces or the parts that go into the new iPhone. And so one of the things we did was we found this guy who he flew to New Zealand every year right before the iPhone was going to be released, because New Zealand, being right on the international date line, was one of the first countries to they were going on sale. What he would do was he would, you know, he'd fly there, get the first available, you know, iPhone, and then immediately just break it apart and figure out who all the suppliers were inside. And because Apple was, they aren't anymore, but at the time they were like notoriously secretive about who the companies were that were, you know, supplying the parts that go in their phone. And we contacted this guy to use in the copy that what we were talking about, what we were writing about, you know, Apple suppliers. And we got so much great information from him about he was able to like show, yeah, each part would have like a code on it. He could decipher the code. Like if it began with like a, you know, a PZ with an Intel part, if it began with a ZY, it was a, you know, a Samsung part. So it was just really good, you know, since the editor of the newsletter was able to get in touch with him and get this information. It was just, you know, really good. It added depth to the copy and just a unique, you know, kind of new level of proof and research. Yeah, it just, you know, kind of adds to what we were talking about before. You know, just kind of doing, like Mike touched on this, going to the next level of researching things. Yeah, you know, the first thing I do is, you know, I'll look on the internet, you know, and start researching things there. But, you know, you really can add depth to your research and your proof if, you know, you're reading books that are on or related to the subject. If you're interviewing people, like, you know, people who are, you know, who know more about the whatever you're talking about than you do, like guys who fly to New Zealand to open up phones. And
yeah, he's really an insider, a quirky, geeky insider. I love it.
Yeah, it was great. And also, what I'm really attached to right now, historical databases on, like, so if you subscribe or become a member of LBRY and utilize the databases in libraries. I'm hooked for some reason on like historical databases right now. I'm reading newspapers in the early 1900s and just finding ways that the stories from back then, it doesn't always apply, of course, but I love reading old newspapers and making the whatever message I'm trying to say, deeper and clearer using historical examples. Like because nobody's looking there, and there's really a lot of good information you can find. So
I think that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing, Mike. I want to check in with you. I know we still have a lot to cover. We're only about halfway through. Would you guys be willing to stay on a little longer, or do you have a hard stop at 4? I want to check real quick.
I can go a little bit longer.
Okay, as I think we're getting some really great stuff here, so I'm hoping this is as helpful to you as it is to our listeners and to your team. One thing I want to ask you, Stephen, is you're talking about databases of historical information. So, for example, just so our listeners understand what you're saying, like if you can get an online access to the New York Times for the past 100 years, those are the kind of databases you're using.
Yeah, essentially, right.
Okay.
Yeah, usually, sorry, this is Mike again. Usually you can go to your library, and most big public library systems have access to, can give you online access to all kinds of different databases that you can't just get on the regular internet stuff.
That's very true, going to the next level, because if you want to find something that everyone else isn't reading, then the top 3 hits on Google for your search is probably not the place to start, because all your competitors have read that also, meaning your fellow copywriters. I want to ask you one question, Stephen, which is when Gerry Spence talks about this idea of proof, he talks about using a brainstorming process of other places to go to find that proof. So I'm wondering, when you said, one of our editors knew about the sky in New Zealand and how he flew to New Zealand every year to get the new iPhone. So do you use that process also when you're sitting down to think about all the proof elements for a promotion? Are you talking to the editors? Are you talking to each other? Are you talking to the librarian? How do you gather all those ideas for proof?
That's a good question. Like I said before, I'll sit down and I'll just put anything, I'll read, on, internet and the databases and books and anything else that I can get any kind of place I can gather information. And what I do is anything that's interesting, I'll put down on a Word doc, and then so before I even write, I have about, hopefully about 20 pages just of interesting facts, figures, quotes, or just ideas that I want to implement in the copy on this.
I think that's great, and I want to just wrap up with that tip for our listeners. It's something that I do too, which is, I call it a brainstorming document, and it includes everything in every direction I've possibly seen, found, typed in. So it's sort of like all the input into my brain that is then going to sort of process and mush it around and come out with some themes from that. So I think, we often talk about having rough drafts. We talk about using outlines. I want to move on to our next. Thanks, Stephen. That was very helpful, and I think we got some really good ideas of where to go with proof and with stories. So, Mike, I want to ask you. This is a little bit related to proof. I think proof is one way that we build trust and credibility in a package. But I wonder if you could talk about why credibility is so important, both in copywriting and in your package in general.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to proof. I think the first thing that we always talk about trying to keep in mind is that the person reading your piece, they don't want to get sucked into reading a 30-page document. They don't want to get sucked into watching an hour-long video or VSL. And so people are looking for they're looking for excuses to stop. And so, you know, one of the best excuses is that you just don't think this person knows what they're talking about, and that you don't necessarily believe what they're saying. And so, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it besides that, except that, you know, my most successful package that I've ever written was very different than anything I'd ever done before, and really very different than anything we as a group had ever done before. And it started all with credibility, and basically, you know, it made kind of a big promise, but then spent probably 2 pages just establishing credibility before picking up with the story again. And
are you talking about the End of America promo, or can you tell us about
the first few pages are all about Porter and the various calls he's made, and the things, you know, the things about him and his life. And so
so now,
you know, I think it's almost impossible to put too much credibility in. You know, we worry that, you know, that there's too much of that a lot, but I think that you should always err on the side of too much.
Interesting,
rather than
right?
Get worried about not having enough.
I think we also get tired of it, right? Because if you write a whole bunch of packages for the same guru, I had this experience at Schaefer's once where, you know, we're kind of using the same credibility elements over and over again, only because those are the most key events and stories and points about this guru that make your case, right? And I fell into the trap of thinking that people, because they were seeing our copy over and over again, had like already learned that and knew those things about him. And then I handed my copy to someone else to read, and they said, you know, I finished this promotion. I got the impression that Bernie Schaefer was some kind of 20-year-old wild gun. I'm like, oh my God, no, you've been doing this for, you know, over 40 years. He's, you know, one of the most seasoned veterans of the options industry. And she's like, well, you really didn't have a lot in there about that. And I realized I had slowly been taking it out, thinking that it was too much. I was boring people. They'd already read that. So it's really interesting when you say almost you can't have too much credibility, and don't make the mistake in a back-end promotion of thinking just because they know you, they already know your credibility story. They still need to be reminded why they should listen to this person.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that just like proof, you know, you're looking for new ways to establish credibility. So, you know, the way that everybody does it is they talk about how many times it's been on TV.
Right.
You know, so it's the same kind of thing where you want to find, you know, it's worth effort to try to find something else that makes the person, you know, credible and believable, and whether it's examples of what the person's done in his life,
right.
Or there's tons of different ways you can do that.
And one of the ways is something that Patrick brought up, which I thought was interesting. And I wonder if you want to just say something about this briefly. Patrick, you brought up that sometimes, counterintuitively, the way that we talk about proof is to actually reveal a weakness or our Achilles heel, to sort of reveal that we're not perfect, and somehow it makes it more true. You want to say just something briefly about that, Patrick, before we go on?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it just makes it seem, well, no, I don't think anybody believes that every investment tool or every strategy works all the time, or that it's always worked. And I think they also, I think they appreciate a story where there's some struggle. And I think if something seems like it works on everything all the time, I mean, you're going to run into an immediate objection that it can't possibly be true. So, and also I think people want to know that something is right for them or not. It can't be right for everybody. I don't think, I mean, one size fits all might work for baseball caps, but it doesn't work for newsletters very much, you know. And I think the more you can carefully hone and define who it's for, and by doing that also exclude some people as well, it strengthens the copy.
You know, one of the most successful things I've ever did in a financial promotion was actually to tell the story of a losing trade, and to talk about this was in options, and we were able to talk about how we got out early, how we protected you from losses, how the loss was only a small loss of 10%, and then within 2 days he'd made, 90% on a different trade, and how one of the key things you need to know as an option trader is when to get out. And so we were revealing a losing trade, but it turned out to be a very powerful proof element, and one I hadn't really, it's sort of counterintuitive. You're like, what? You're going to tell the story of a losing trade? And I had to argue for it, but it actually worked really well because it was presenting proof in a different way. It was saying, we'll also get you out before you have 100% loss. When we see something that's going south and not working, which is going to happen to everyone, no trader is perfect, not even, the best. We'll get you out early before you make a lot of losses, which kind of leads seamlessly into our next point, which is we know that our audience has objections. It's just part of the game, and they have lots of objections, like as you were saying these days, including ones that we probably haven't thought of before. So what do you do with your group, Mike, to make sure that you've got all the objections on the table and that you're really addressing them? And Stephen, if you want to chime in with Mike as you guys go through this, that would be great. But I'm just curious, how do you guys as a group make sure you've covered all the objections?
Yeah, I think we do some things, but reading this really made me think that we don't do enough. And so, what we typically do is we kind of review copy. We review the beginning, the lead, which is, particularly the first 2 pages or so. And then we feel like after we've gotten that right, we really don't review it again until the whole document is done. And then at that point, we go through it page by page as a group, and we point out objections. We point out places where it's boring or confusing or unbelievable or distracting or not necessary. So we do that, but what this made me think about was I really liked this idea that you need to think about all the objections, and you need to make sure, he was talking how in his cases you need to make sure that he got all those objections out there. And I thought it was so clever the way that he talked about meeting the objections of, particularly like asking for lots of money in a case where, a child has died or someone's, in some kind of awful thing where someone's died and, people are asking for a huge settlement, and, he makes sure to always overcome that objection and talk about how, it does disgust him and it makes him feel awful that, that you have to get money for this. But unfortunately in our court system, that's the only justice that you have. You can't send this person to jail. All you can do is issue a huge penalty, and that has to be in the form of money. And so, anyway, so it got me thinking that, and I feel like we did this at one time in our group, and maybe we didn't, but I like this idea of just making a list of every objection that you could have and making sure that in each package, it would kind of be like a checklist, and making sure that in every package you met all the objections that someone could have to this. So
I know, I love that idea of starting out with just this brainstorming session where you actually put on your skeptic hat and, maybe we would have, I was thinking maybe you could have someone at the table taking on the defender position of, this is why you should buy the product, and then everyone else sort of like drowning him in their objections and having a note taker write them all down and sort of having this brainstorming list of every single reason why someone might say no. And if you did that at the beginning, then at the end when you read over the promotion, you would have that checklist to mark against it to say, did we answer this one? Did we answer this one? Did we answer this one? And I know that we can't have a 486-page promotion, although I will say I do think The End of America came close.
Did it come close? Yeah, I don't know if you can do it at the beginning. I think you could start at the beginning with some objections, but I think that so many objections come up as you're reading copy.
That's true.
I think if in a review process we made it a point to say, all right, well, what possible objections, when you read this copy, why would you not buy it? And, if it's about a new drug or something, then, you probably have some objections about, well, okay, well, I've heard that the cure for cancer a million times, and
right, I don't believe it
why
anymore.
is this any different? So I don't believe it.
Right.
So, and you might not be able to, what I liked was about the book especially was that you can't, you might not have an answer for every objection. You might not be able to prove every objection, but to at least acknowledge it, I think in the copy, it at least gets, it's almost as good as proving, it, so just acknowledge
right.
it and to state why you're thinking that too, or you thought that
right.
too, and when you first started out investigating this, I think that can go a long way.
Just kind of an interesting point here, Mike. I was a few years ago. I was getting some copy ready for print, and to see if I could, do something to boost response, I created a frequently asked questions page, which is something I'd never done before. It was like a separate page that would go, in the envelope with the copy. And I started just listing out, what were all the objections people would have, and those would be like the questions, and I would answer them. And I found that, I had objections that I hadn't addressed in the copy, but I wrote them down anyway on the page, and I addressed them on the page. So I thought it would be kind of an interesting exercise to do for any promotion that you write when you're done or when you think you're done, to kind of go back and do a frequently asked questions page. And that way, you have, you really write it down, really take the time to, answer the question in detail, and it's probably a good exercise to do for copy when you're done.
I think, Stephen, that's a great idea. It's actually something we do in health promotions, especially for supplements, all the time, which is we think of all the things someone might ask that can be really specific, but that don't always get brought up, like. Let's say it's a sleeping supplement, right? Well, will I feel really drowsy in the morning? Is this something I can take at night and still drive? Or if someone has an allergy, is this safe to take if you're allergic to wheat? Or, you try to, it's very easy on the health side because you can kind of go down the list of you think of all the questions they might ask their doctor if they were about to take the supplement, and you try to at least come up with answers to all of them. So I've never thought of taking something that I do in the health market sort of naturally as one of my checklist sidebars that I always have, and applying it to the financial market. I think that's absolutely brilliant to use an objections list, frequently asked questions. Why this? Why not that? How is he going to do this? That puts yourself in your shoes, which is something he talks about a lot. I think those are both really great ideas. And I love how he handled this in the book around racism. Talk about a delicate issue. And here he's trying to find out which of his jurors might be feeling this. And I love when he says, if you just say, no, I don't have it, nobody's going to believe you. And instead he finds a way to sort of circumvent that and be more candid with them by revealing something of himself, which sort of leads into our question about the first person. Mike, we've heard this over and over and over again, the power of the first person. So I'm going to ask you officially one more time, is it true that the first person is always the most powerful, and why do you believe that?
Yeah, I don't know. I had a little bit of a different thought about this, and maybe it's what you're asking. But whenever we write,
we'll let Justin argue with you. You two can hash it out.
Yeah. So my thought was, whenever we write promotion, of course it's always in first person, and it's always, it's a letter. It's the reader says I, and I did this, I did that. So it's always in first person. But the thing that it got me thinking about was, whenever you do a promotion, you have a choice for it to be signed off or in the voice of lots of different people. It can be the person whose product it is you're writing about. It could be the person who's the publisher. It can be, the person who discovered the idea or what have you. So it can be a customer service person, So it just got me thinking about, is it as effective for a promotion to be from, like, say, I've written lots of promotions for me, about financial about our, so it's me typically talking, and I'll talk about how I heard about this idea from Steve Sugarud, you know, one of our editors, or from Porter Stansberry, and it just made me think about, I wonder, it seems to me like those packages are never as good, because, you know, part of what makes copy really work is that the reader feels like it's a letter from this person directly, and they, you know, kind of like when you're watching a movie, you kind of have this moment where you suspend disbelief, and you're into the letter if it's good, and you're into all the details and the story of it. And I wonder if I've had packages, we all have, where they've been successful, where it's, you know, a person writing about someone else, but it just made me think that perhaps we should push much harder to always make promotions from the person whose idea it is. You know, it seems like that should be better in every case. You know, and we always kind of, the one thing that we sometimes kind of worry about is, you know, well, it's harder for a person to talk and kind of gloat and talk about their picks and how great they are.
That's exactly where I was going to go. How do you do that?
How
do you do credibility?
But I don't think that's nearly as big of an issue, because it's easy to kind of write around that a bit and talk about how, look, you know, I'm not saying this to brag, and of course I've made lots of mistakes, and I've had lots of losers, and, you know, and anyway, so I don't think that's that big of a deal. I would like to hear from some of the people on my team what they think about, you know, is it always better to have it be from the person whose idea it really is, you know, and kind of their discovery of it and investigation of it. So
I think that's great. Let's see, who wants to kick off on this one? Justin, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Why don't you go, and then everyone just sort of quickly chime in so we can get a take on this, because I think Mike is right. Like, whose voice, and who is the person speaking? Should it be the guru? Should it be someone speaking about the guru? Let's get the conversation rolling. I love it.
Yeah, so I think the big secret of writing in first person is to play with perspective. So I do agree with Mike that you do want to try, especially I'd say for front-end promotions, to have it come from the guru. But I can tell you, you know, after spending a decade writing back-end promotions, often, you know, you find yourself as a copywriter telling the same old story year after year after year. It's a guy in a room picking stocks, and you tell that story over and over again. And what I personally love to do is I love to pick someone who is not the guru. I can tell you over the years I've written promotions from the editor's girlfriend, from his college roommate.
From his girlfriend?
What's that? His girlfriend, yeah. Believe it or not, we work with a guy who it makes a lot of sense to tell from his girlfriend, and we've also done it from his computer guide. And one thing we've done recently, and I think this kind of answers the question of does it make sense to have it come from the guru if you want to retain credibility? I like to have a promotion come from an amateur who's never used the financial technique. Let's say if it's someone picking stocks or someone recommending a complicated financial technique, someone who's never done it before, and you actually do sort of a documentary behind-the-scenes look at this amateur using this financial technique with his own money, showing whether or not it works or not, and not really telling his story as a source of credibility, but using his story to highlight the credibility of the editor. And that's something we've done recently.
Looked at one of your, you have a recent control with that I've been reading over and studying that I love. Can you remind me what the headline is on that one? It's the guy who's going to sit down and like he's going to test the service and let you look over his shoulder, and he's going to find out if you're telling the truth or not, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one I was thinking about it. I think the headline is, for the first time ever, I'm going to use Stansberry's most successful research service with my own money. And
brilliant.
I think the subhead is, if it works, I'll make $100 in the next few minutes. And what we like about that promotion is you don't know if it's going to work. The technique for the amateur using it. We like to write the promotion in a way where he might actually lose money. The financial technique may not work out for him. And what's fun about that is you get to basically talk about all the things you would normally do if it came from the guru, but 80% of the promotions you see in the industry are from the guru. So this is kind of a totally fresh take on that. It lets you talk about track record, it lets you talk about the biography of the editor, all in a new way. So
We did that very briefly in a video, actually, at the Motley Fool for an options trading service, because we knew that stock traders were terrified to try options. And so we did an interview where the one guy says to the other guy, which was true, they were friends, they both worked at the Motley Fool. He's like, this guy's been trying to get me to trade options forever, right? And now he's challenged me to do it. I'm going to sit down and see if I can do it. And it feels genuine, it's really true, and you put yourself in the shoes of the amateur. I think it's brilliant. I want to leave a little space here for anyone else in your team who wants to chime in and talk about this. Matt or Greg or anyone else have a comment they want to make?
Yeah, well, I actually had a thought when Justin was just talking about that, and I thought that was a really great package. Obviously, it was very successful, and I hadn't thought about it before, but I think that's using the amateur as the narrator approach is a very natural way to bring up objections, right up front. I mean, without even really, asking the questions directly or anything like that. You're basically by putting the reader or the viewer in the shoes of this amateur, someone who's very much like them probably, they kind of are vicariously through him saying, look, I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to find out. And so you kind of allow the viewer that way to safely, I guess, raise his or her objections and have them answered as the video progresses.
I think that's brilliant. It's exactly the way you want. It's the same way he's talking about doing proof by putting the jury members in a jail cell. You're doing the same thing. You're putting them in the chair of the person who's trying to use this service for the first time, which is going to be them in 20 hours if they buy your service. Now I'm there. I'm in that jail cell. I'm experiencing exactly what it's going to be. Not that I'm saying your service is comparable to a jail cell. I'm just using the example from the book. I know we are running low on time, so I want to shift us to your last point here, Mike, which you say is the key to a big hit. So tell me, what is your number one secret to a big hit that you found in this book?
Yeah, I think that, he makes this point, and I think it's what you're always striving for as a copywriter, especially when you're writing packages, name acquisition packages on the front end. I think, you're always, the first thought when figuring out what to write is you're always trying to think about what are people either afraid of or really excited about right now. And, the ideal thing that you can find is you can put something into words that people have been really thinking about, but haven't seen written in a particular way or haven't been able to voice themselves or to really put it all together. And so, it's kind of the expression of this kind of tipping point idea that can lead to huge hits in this industry.
Greg, do you want to chime in here? I know this quote was one that really stuck to you in terms of how do you come up with these ideas that express what's on everyone else's mind but maybe hasn't been said yet in the public discourse or in the marketplace?
I think that I guess what really kind of stuck out to me about this idea is just I think we all have a tendency to, especially if people who have been in the business for a little while, you have your library of resources that you tend to go to, and even if they're a little bit more obscure, you're basically dealing with media in some form. You're trying to get, whether it's proof elements or ideas or whatever the case may be, you're reading a lot of different sources. But, excuse me, your reader is also reading those sources and watching news media, and especially in this day and age, a lot of those sources tend to not really even be that disparate. It's very homogenous the way the news is reported. You hear the same stories reported in various different mediums, but they all kind of center around the same idea. And I think it's crucial that we use those as a barometer for what readers are really interested in. We talk about this all the time, you know, when we're starting a package. It's something that's really on the minds of our readers right now. And a good barometer for that is to know, like, all right, what's really being talked about out there in the news, in the newspapers. But I think I think this gets back to Spence's whole kind of theme with his book, the idea of like feeling and putting yourselves in, you know, the juror's shoes or your defendant's shoes or whatever the case may be. You really can't, you know, intellectualize. You can't just take those ideas and try to make, you know, rational arguments using those same ideas. You kind of have to feel, okay, what's kind of missing from this? What can I uniquely bring to this discussion that no one else is bringing? Like you have to take an idea that is out there in the world, but somehow spin it into your own way. And you can only do that by kind of really feeling what it is about this idea that people are concerned about, or what it is about this idea that is so powerful. What is you have to feel the mindset of your reader, and you have to kind of feel, you know, what is not being answered from all this. And I think that's one of the keys to coming up with a unique way to express an idea is maybe just tapping into your own confusion or your own dismay about what's out there, and what questions you have about, all right, well, what does this really mean?
Right. I think that's really true, because when you're seeing a theme or an idea that's appearing in all the public discourse, in all the media outlets, I think that's true, that we're bombarded and they all start to sound the same because they all pick up the same story. They're all jumping on the same hot spot. So how do you take that to the next level to address the real heart of it, so to speak? And I love how he says one of those doors is through emotion. What's the emotion this is provoking? And then where is that coming from? And I know Clayton does it when he says the so what over and over and over again to try to get to what is the heart of the matter. Before we wrap up and move on to our close, I want to give poor Matt a chance. I realize I have completely skipped over him. I know that, Mike, you said Matt is one of the newer members of your team. So, Matt, I'm curious, as someone who's been in copywriting for, I think, Mike, you said less than 2 years, and Matt, you're going to have to unmute yourself here. I'm curious as to, for you, what really stood out, maybe one of the key lessons from the book as someone who's coming to it sort of fresh to the copywriting game. What struck you or stayed with you from the book that's helping you or made you think about copy in a different way than maybe you have been so far?
Well, definitely, like we were talking about earlier, proof is just such an important thing, and proof really ties in well with credibility. They really go hand in hand, and building credibility is all about being able to prove that you yourself are trustworthy. And even in this presentation today, you started off by first thing you did was introduce Mike and why he's such a great copywriter and how many millions of dollars worth of products he sold, and then you went and talked about Gerry and how he's has never lost a criminal case, and it just it shows why these guys are so credible and why we're listening to them and why people care, and with proof you're always asking why, why should I trust you, why should you listen to me?
Right.
So that's just a huge part of this book, always answering that reason why and providing that proof. And I just wanted to comment on Greg's point too of kind of finding those things that really resonate with people and things that are timely, and then being able to express them in a way that are very unique in ways that people have never heard before. And I think one way that Greg has done this before is a couple of years ago, when the shale revolution was going on with fracking in the United States, and before, it was very early on in the process, and people were hearing about shale, but Greg found a way to frame that idea, and he called it Eagle Diesel, kind of a way of describing this American oil discovery that's going on here, how, America is going to be pumping out all this clean, affordable, cheap energy. And just to put it in that way, something that was on people's minds, but it's a completely fresh and new way that they've never heard before, but it's something that was able to resonate with the readers really well.
I think that's great. I want to move on to our homework assignment, and that's sort of a seamless way to do this. So I'm going to give you, you've had lots of homework assignments from the call. One of the things we talked about was to look for new proof elements, and we've got lots of ideas going around on this call to do that. So one of the challenges I'm going to give you is to try to come up with a new proof element that you haven't used before for your next promotion. The other idea I'm going to challenge you to do is to talk about objections. When you are sitting down and working on your next promotion, I want you to try to use this idea of asking questions, right? What would your prospect ask as a question about this? What objection might they bring up, most commonly asked questions, and then make sure that you're answering them in your promotion, whether you do it head-on in the sidebar that actually says, commonly asked questions, or whether you just do it in the copy itself. And the third challenge that I put on here is for one way to know whether or not copywriting is for you is to know if you are a natural storyteller. And one of the ways that you can discover whether you're a natural storyteller is to challenge yourself to tell a story in every conversation that you're having, either for a day, or challenge yourself to tell 5 stories this week. I did a little bit of the green eggs and ham thing here. You can do it in a bar, in the car, with your partner, to your children, at work, at home, at play. The one I love to do is when someone says, "What do you do?" I practice my story by thinking of the project I'm working on now, and I answer by saying something like, "Well, I'm working on this really cool book, and this guy did this thing," and then I just tell it as a short story to see if I can hold their attention, and just like it helps him practice his case, it helps me see if I'm actually expressing something that's on everybody's mind, a key idea that they want to know. Real quickly, I want to remind you all that our next great book club, we are going to read The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Mike, I don't know if you read this before. This is actually more along the personal development kind of line. In terms of, I think many of us have challenges in our careers that actually relate to how we get in our own way. And the idea in The Big Leap, which I found really interesting as a metaphor, he uses the idea of a thermostat, and he argues that we all have a set, and I think this is true of our prospects also, we all have a set amount of success and happiness and joy and wealth that we're willing to allow in our lives. And when we start to see that, guys, someone's got a lot of background on the call, so if you're not talking, if you can mute, that would help us right now. I'm not sure where the background noise is coming from. So his idea is we have an internal thermostat, and when we get too happy or too successful or too wealthy, we do something stupid like shoot ourselves in the foot to bring that back down, adjust that thermostat back down to the level of success that we're comfortable with. My guest for that call is going to be Monica Day, and if any of you have struggled with your own vision of success or feeling like you're getting in your own way of achieving the greatest vision for your life, whether it be as a copywriter or anything else, I hope you'll join us. What Monica says is The Big Leap literally changed my life. I found it when I was coaching copywriters, and I use it today as a fundamental book for all my coaching clients. It was responsible for my own transition from copywriting into coaching full-time. So many things became clear to me. The procrastination I struggled with, the feeling I always felt like I bumped up against. When it came to money and career, reading it was like someone turned a light on in a dark room and discovering a door in front of me that I could just open and walk through. I think the distinction between the zone of excellence or your zone of genius is brilliant. It explains why so many of us leave successful careers to take big risks to try something new. And I think that's very true of many of copywriters that come from high success in other careers, and it's something they're challenging themselves to learn a new career. How understanding your upper limit problem, which is where he talks about this idea of the thermostat, will take the brake off your earning potential and let it run wild as it should. So I hope you will all join us. Note there's a different time for that call, a different week rather. It's Thursday, May 21st at 3 p.m. As usual, we have 10 winners who will get The Big Leap for free I will once again, as tradition, completely butcher all 10 names here. Michael Gichigio, Tony Ostian, Barbara Moga, Paul Wilder, Derek Peterson, Angela Gordon, Rebecca Arrington, Joseph Javed, Francisco Vargas. You will all be receiving a free copy of The Big Leap, complement of AWAI's Great Book Club. Our next book after The Big Leap, our June selection, is Stephen King's On Writing. Mike, I think you've had your team members read this book before. We're going to be joined by John Ford. And it's a great book, not just about writing, but about, if you're a Stephen King fan, you'll love it. It's hysterical, the stories he tells about his life and his writing career. But it's also an amazing book to see how a writer goes from a first draft to a final draft in depth, and you'll be amazed at how he slowly works and massages his copy, which I know is something we can all appreciate. So I just want to wrap up. I really want to thank you, Mike, for joining us and for bringing your whole team with us here today, and for going above and beyond the call of duty and staying on the line so long with us. I want to thank Patrick, Justin, Stephen, Matt, and Greg for your contributions and for letting us kind of get a peek at how you guys kick ideas around. I cannot thank you enough for joining us, and I know I got a ton out of this call, and I hope that it was a benefit to you and to your team as well. So I'm going to sign off.